Now the Dead Walk. Chapter 1. Jasmine slowly opened her eyes, immediately blinded by a bright light overhead. She winced and turned her head, blinking rapidly as her vision adjusted. She was in a small room, lying on a bed. Medical equipment and 4 bags surrounded her. What happened? The last thing she remembered was being attacked, the snarling, rotted faces flashing by as she felt teeth tearing into her shoulder. Then blackness. She sat up with a gasp, hand flying to her shoulder. It was bandaged, a dull ache radiating from the wound. She was alive. But where was she? This looked like some kind of medical clinic. Swinging her legs over the side of the bed, she stood unsteadily. Her muscles were weak and shaky. She made her way to the door and opened it a crack. The hallway outside was dark and quiet. "Hello," she called hoarsely. There was no response. A thick layer of dust coated the floor and medical carts abandoned haphazardly. This place was deserted. Unease growing, Jasmine shuffled down the hallway, using the wall for support. She came to a reception area and froze. Behind the counter, a body lay face down in a pool of dried blood. Jasmine cautiously approached it. "Excuse me, are you okay?" She gingerly rolled it over with her foot, then leapt back with a cry. The wide, dull eyes, sunken cheeks and skin grayed with rot left no doubt this was one of the infected. But how long had it been here, dead? Jasmine's heart pounded as she searched for a weapon. Finding a metal rod, she clutched it tightly and continued exploring. She discovered a locker room and gratefully changed into jeans, a t-shirt and jacket. Moving to the lobby, she halted in dismay. Through the glass doors, she could see that the parking lot and road winding down the mountain were choked with abandoned, ransacked vehicles. Skeletal remains littered the ground. Where was everyone? How long had she been unconscious? Gripped by growing panic, Jasmine burst through the front doors and out into the silent, still mountain air. "Hello," she shouted desperately. "Is anyone out there, please? Can anyone hear me?" Only the forlorn cry of a hawk high overhead answered her. She was alone. Chapter 2. Jasmine managed to hotwire an old pickup truck and headed cautiously down the winding mountain road. She kept the radio on, constantly scanning stations, but only static greeted her. After passing numerous wrecks, she arrived at the outskirts of a small town. Storefronts gaped empty, windows smashed in. Overturned emergency vehicles lay motionless in the streets. The place looked gutted. Pulling up to an auto parts shop, Jasmine pried open the locked doors with a crowbar. She hastily filled a duffel bag with tools, then froze at a noise from the back. Gripping her metal rod, she stalked between aisles cluttered with toppled shelves towards the stockroom. A shambling shadow lurched out. Jasmine reacted instinctively, swinging with all her might. There was a sickening crunch as the rod connected with putrid flesh. The creature collapsed, leaking dark congealed blood across the concrete floor. Jasmine gagged at the overwhelming stench of rot as she rolled it over with her foot. Another infected, but clearly long dead. She quickly searched the rest of the shop, finding it empty. After loading her truck with supplies, she drove further into town towards a grocery store. Passing a gas station, she coasted to a stop, eyes widening. A crudely spray-painted message read, "Hello, dead, head north for Roman." Jasmine exhaled slowly. So there were, or had been, other survivors. She looked north, seeing mountains rising in the distance. Could some still be alive up there, in those remote heights and valleys? It was the only lead she had. She filled fuel cans and the truck's tank before resuming her journey. Reaching the grocery store, Jasmine loaded up on non-perishables and bottled water. A Main Street liquor store provided her with bottles of whiskey that could be used for barter or disinfectant. She took more weapons from a sporting goods shop: a pistol, hunting knife, hatchet, and crossbow with arrows. Finally, she hit the jackpot, a camping supply store. She took cold weather clothing, hiking boots, tent, sleeping bag, and bag. As an afterthought, she grabbed 2 portable radios and earpieces. Maybe others were using them to communicate. Armed and supplied for the journey north, Jasmine left the dead town. She drove steadily all day until she could no longer fight off exhaustion. Parking the truck in a grove of trees, she set up her tent and collapsed into an uneasy sleep, gun close at hand. Chapter 3. Over the next week, Jasmine slowly made her way north towards the mountains looming ever closer. She stuck to back roads and trails, avoiding cities and towns where masses of infected still shuffled mindlessly in the streets. Rummaging through abandoned homes, she found heavy winter clothing to augment her supplies. The nights grew colder, her breath frosting in the mountain air, as autumn took hold in the high country. The isolation wore on her. At night she would switch on the radio, broadcasting blindly into the static. "This is Jasmine King, broadcasting on open frequency. Are there any survivors out there? Please respond." Only silence replied. Was she the last one alive? She tracked her route on an old road atlas, getting closer to the coordinates scribbled on the gas station wall. Parking the truck each night near water sources, she would filter gallons to replenish her stores. Wildlife was still abundant, deer wandering placidly nearby as she cooked fresh venison steaks. But the monsters were never far behind. One morning, she was washing in a stream when guttural moans drifted from the trees behind her. She turned in time to see 3 infected stumbling into view, drawn by the smell of cooking meat in her camp. Cursing, she grabbed her knife and pistol, retreating up the bank. The creatures followed relentlessly, driven by insatiable hunger. As they drew nearer, Jasmine steadied her aim and fired. The head of one exploded in a spray of rotting brain matter. When the others kept coming, she switched to her knife, ducking under flailing arms to drive the long blade into soft skulls. Panting hard, she watched the now motionless corpses slide downstream, carried over rocks in the rushing water. These mountains were still infested. Climbing higher, the air grew colder and thinner. Snow began to cling to rugged granite peaks all around. Jasmine was running out of road, forced to abandon her truck and continue on foot with her backpack. Trudging up remote winding trails, she finally reached a high mountain valley dotted with quaint lodges and shops, some kind of ski resort. Her legs ached terribly, but she had made it. According to the map, this was near the coordinates left weeks ago by the mysterious Roman. "Hello," she called out as she shuffled through the silent village, voice echoing eerily between dark, vacant buildings. She was about to give up when a flicker of light from a distant lodge caught her eye. Heart leaping, she staggered towards it as fast as her exhausted body could move. Chapter 4. Jasmine pounded urgently on the solid wooden door of the lodge. When no one answered, she slumped against it in despair. Then she heard muffled voices and the click of a round being chambered. She backed up quickly as the door creaked open. Eyes wide, she found herself staring at a bearded man holding a hunting rifle pointed right at her. "Who are you? What's your business here?" he demanded gruffly. "Please," she rasped through parched lips. Water. The man studied her intently, then slowly lowered his gun and waved her inside. He introduced himself as Roman Durand, handing her a canteen. As she gulped down the cool water, he fetched her some dried venison and fruits. Jasmine devoured the food hungrily while he watched, curious but wary. When she finished, she told him her story. His eyes widened in surprise. "That was over 2 months ago that I left that message," he said. "We thought no more survivors would make it this far." He explained that he led a community sheltering here in the old ski resort's Peak Lodge and nearby buildings. There were 50 men, women, and children who had fled the cities early on, before the worst of the outbreak. Roman and a few guides had wilderness experience and taught the group survival skills. "What about you?" Jasmine asked. "How's a mountain man like you become leader?" Roman's face darkened. "I was up here running adventure tours when it started. We brought the clients up to the lodge for safety. Then the world went to hell, had to step up, keep folks alive, you know." Jasmine nodded. As he showed her around, Roman said they could always use an extra set of hands and someone with medical skills. The former police officer would be an asset to their community if she proved herself trustworthy. Jasmine quickly agreed. As night fell, for the first time since she woke up in that abandoned hospital, she felt a flicker of hope. Chapter 5. The days settled into a routine for Jasmine at the North Face community, as the group called their mountain refuge. Roman put her on rotating patrol duty around the perimeter of their small collection of lodges and other buildings. The infected were scarce in these heights, but they had to stay vigilant. Jasmine also stood guard while scavenging teams made occasional trips down the mountain for supplies. The community kept busy preparing for the brutal winter ahead. They gathered and chopped firewood, smoking meat from hunting trips to preserve it. Jasmine's EMT training proved useful as she assisted Claire, their medic, in the clinic. She also showed others how to properly clean guns and shared survival tips from her police training. Gradually, Jasmine started making friends among the eclectic group of survivors. They came from all walks of life, now united in their struggle to endure in this post-apocalyptic world. Beyond Roman, some of the more prominent members included Neil, a former soldier who helped train the community in defense and weaponry. Cynical and brooding, but loyal to Roman. Amelia, one of the cooks who kept spirits up with her positive attitude and mouth-watering recipes. Eric, a mechanic who maintained their generators and vehicles. Easygoing and lighthearted. Connor and Bridget, a married couple from Ireland on a climbing vacation gone awry. Both tough and resourceful. Jasmine grew closest with Hannah, a nurse practitioner who worked alongside Claire in the clinic. Hannah's quick wit and sardonic humor meshed well with Jasmine's snarky personality. The two friends often chatted and joked over dinner, providing some needed levity. As autumn faded and snow began piling up, Roman announced it was time for their first major supply run before winter snows blocked the mountain passes. Jasmine volunteered eagerly, wanting to contribute more to the community that had taken her in. She joined the scavenging party heading into town early the next day, armed and ready for anything. Chapter 6. Their breath steaming in the frigid pre-dawn, Jasmine and 7 others piled into the pickup trucks to head down the winding mountain roads. Roman had given them a list of crucial supplies to look for: fuel, medicine, tools, non-perishable food, weapons. This would likely be their last chance before heavy snows arrived. Jasmine rode shotgun with Eric behind the wheel of their truck. The others followed close behind. As the town came into view, Jasmine was surprised to see a few infected roaming the streets. The cold must have preserved them. She readied her assault rifle as the small convoy rolled in. They cruised the streets slowly, on alert for threats. Parking outside a pharmacy, a group went in while the others stood guard, shooting the odd zombie staggering too close. They quickly looted medical supplies, Jasmine grabbing asthma inhalers for a teenager back at the resort who needed them. Letting her haul back outside, they moved further into town, searching for a hardware store next. As they turned a corner, Jasmine spotted a fast-moving figure dart behind a dumpster up ahead. "Wait," she called out sharply, making everyone halt. Her police instincts were buzzing. Keeping her rifle ready, she cautiously approached the dumpster. "Come out with your hands up," she ordered. A young girl with matted hair and tattered clothing hesitantly emerged. Jasmine guessed she was around 13 or 14. Eric tried approaching her, but she backed away like a cornered animal, eyes darting around for an escape. Slinging his rifle over his shoulder, Eric extended a hand. "It's okay, we're not going to hurt you," he said gently. "There are more of us in the mountains: food, shelter, medicine. What's your name?" The girl hesitated, then finally whispered, "Ava." Jasmine felt an unexpected pang in her heart. What horrors had this child endured alone down here? Eric coaxed Ava gently towards their truck, and soon they were headed back up the mountain with a new survivor in tow. The rest of the day's scavenging went smoothly. Their trucks were loaded down with supplies when they started up the winding mountain switchbacks as a light snow began falling, the season's first. Glancing back at the shivering girl wrapped in a blanket, Jasmine hoped they had reached Eva in time. Chapter 7. Taking watch that night, Jasmine gazed out from the ski resort lodge's roof as fat snowflakes tumbled down, shrouding the silent mountains in winter's hush. Something moved in the trees nearby. She raised her night vision binoculars for a closer look. A pack of wolves were sniffing around the building's perimeter, no doubt drawn by the scent of fresh meat cooking earlier. Jasmine felt a primal shiver, even though she knew the animals were more afraid of humans. Slinging her rifle over one shoulder, she used her flashlight to mimic a spotlight, scanning it around. The wolves retreated into the darkness. The next day, Jasmine told Roman about the wolves. Though predators had been scarce since the infected took over, starvation could make the animals brave again. They had to be vigilant. Roman agreed, ordering more sentries at night. There was already so much to worry about beyond just staying fed and warm. Jasmine went to check on Ava, who was resting in the clinic. The teen seemed in decent health physically, but the haunted look in her eyes betrayed the trauma she had endured alone out there before Eric found her. Jasmine's heart went out to the girl. She would heal in time here. As winter set in over the next few weeks, the mood in the community turned tense. Although their lodge buildings had electricity from diesel generators, heating fuel was limited. Roman rationed its use. Everyone slept clustered together under piles of blankets to conserve warmth. Cold seeped through cracks no matter how much they insulated. Spirits flagged. Jasmine did her best to keep people's hopes up, helping decorate for Christmas to restore some holiday spirit, even playing carols on a portable speaker. Laughter rang out again, seeing Connor, dressed as Santa, handing out small gifts on Christmas morning. But anxiety brewed under the surface as the snow piled higher, blocking them in. What if someone got dangerously sick or injured? Claire's medical supplies were scarce this deep in winter. Jasmine sensed the hidden fear in people's eyes each morning. Were they totally cut off from the outside world now until spring? Chapter 8. Winter stretched on interminably. Howling wind shook the rafters through endless gray days and frigid nights. People's moods became as dreary as the frozen landscape outside. In the isolation and silence of the snowbound mountain, old tensions surfaced. Jasmine stepped in to break up a heated late-night argument between Eric and Neil. They stood nose to nose, Eric accusing Neil of hoarding food. As she got between them, Neil snarled that Eric was letting their fuel reserves dwindle by not adequately maintaining the generators. She sent them both off to cool down. Others squabbled and sniped over petty issues. Roman's leadership was questioned behind his back. Jasmine was concerned, but not surprised. Cabin fever was setting in on top of the scarcity of supplies and the natural fear of being trapped. Keeping order would become even harder. She confided her worries to Roman one day. "Yeah, I know," he said grimly, cleaning his rifle. "Gotta keep everyone busy. Break up the monotony. We'll send out more hunting and scavenging trips soon as the storm passes. Folks need purpose, direction." Jasmine realized that was part of why Roman had welcomed her here. He needed help keeping this community focused and disciplined. She gave him a reassuring pat on the back. They would maintain order and survive together. Soon enough, she was leading a scouting expedition down the mountain. The fresh snowfall made it slow going, but they managed to take a few deer and some supplies from an abandoned ranger station. Being outside in the sweeping vistas lifted everyone's spirits. Jasmine was tirelessly optimistic, telling jokes over their campfire to keep morale high. Returning to the resort, she checked in on Ava, who was reading in her room. Jasmine was thrilled to see the shy girl she had rescued now looking healthy, eyes bright with life and hope again. She gave Ava's shoulder a gentle, encouraging squeeze. However long and dark this winter, life would go on. Spring would come again to these mountains. Chapter 9. Early one morning, Jasmine was awoken by shouts and a clamor of activity outside. She grabbed her rifle and rushed out to see everyone gathered in the snowy courtyard, staring up at the Peak Lodge's roof. Squinting against the dawn light reflecting off the snow, she spotted a man standing on the edge of the roof, swaying dangerously. It was Eric. Heart lurching, Jasmine pushed through the crowd, yelling up to him. What was he doing? "Stay back," he shouted, slurred voice echoing across the courtyard. "I can't take this place anymore, the cold, the waiting." Jasmine froze. Eric was drunk, a bottle dangling from his hand. She had to talk him down quickly before he did anything stupid. "Eric, please, you don't want to do this," she called out gently. "Let's go inside, get some coffee and talk." He teetered closer to the edge. "I'm done talking. Should have left with the others down south before the snow hit. Now I'm trapped." Jasmine's mind raced. Others must have fled the resort, explaining the lowered morale and Eric's outburst about dwindling supplies. Why hadn't Roman told her? No time for that now. "You're not trapped, Eric. We just have to stick together a little longer. Remember what you told me when I got here. How you knew we'd survive the winter because you once made it through 2 months snowed in a cabin." She saw him hesitate, the bottle lowering slightly. "But that was different," he mumbled. "I know this is hard," Jasmine said gently. "But we need you, Eric. Who's going to keep the generators running? Come inside and help me figure out a plan." After an agonizing moment, his shoulders slumped in defeat. "Okay." Jasmine breathed a sigh of relief as Connor helped Eric down. But as she met Roman's eye, she knew they had to address the growing despair, or they might not all make it to spring. Chapter 10. Over the next few days, Jasmine kept a close eye on Eric as his drunken stupor wore off. He was embarrassed by the incident, but his despair remained palpable. She gently encouraged him to talk about it while they did repairs together. He opened up about his crushing sense of isolation and hopelessness. The long winter had drained his will. Jasmine saw the same bleakness haunting others in the community when she made her rounds. People were struggling, feeling trapped and abandoned. She knew Roman felt the burden of leadership heavily now. Late one night she found him solemnly gazing out a frost-lined window into the silent darkness, rare doubts creeping through his stoic facade. "We'll get through this," Jasmine said, putting a hand on his shoulder. "But we have to be honest, no more secrets." Roman nodded reluctantly. The next day he gathered everyone in the cramped dining hall. The benches filled up, people rubbing their hands together for warmth, faces gaunt and pale from the long winter. Roman cleared his throat. "I know things have been hard," he began. "I should have told you all sooner that we had some folks leave down the mountain. That's on me." Murmurs rippled through the room. Roman raised a hand for quiet. "But dwelling on who left don't help none. We're still 50 strong. We knew winter here would be tough when we started this community. What matters now is how we get through the next couple months together. Any ideas?" Slowly, suggestions came. Schedule more outdoor activities. Turn the lounge into a rec room for games and entertainment. Make the most of the holidays they had left. The mood seemed to lift slightly as people felt encouraged to voice their needs. There was hope if they stuck together. Jasmine stood off to the side, watching Roman. She realized she had come to admire his tireless drive to protect these people. He would risk anything for them, and for this vision of theirs, a life beyond just basic survival. His big heart and conscience were as crucial to North Face as his wilderness skills. If they kept that spirit alive in each other, they would make it to see the rebirth spring would bring to these mountains. Chapter 11. Winter's grasp slowly loosened on the mountains. Days grew longer, temperatures less brutal. Jasmine was outside with Ava chopping wood when she heard an unfamiliar sound, the cheerful burbling of meltwater. She grinned, feeling the warm rays of sun on her face. "Hear that? The ice is breaking up." Ava listened. "Spring's coming?" she asked hesitantly, as if hardly daring to believe. "It is, and we made it through," Jasmine said triumphantly. Ava hugged her, laughing. The heavier snows were melting, recognizing access to lower elevations. Roman announced they would make supply runs to get a jump on preparations for next winter. Jasmine volunteered to lead a scavenging group. The teens and children lined up to cheer and wave as the trucks headed out the first mild morning. Making their way down the winding mountain road, Jasmine was reinvigorated, being off base again and outdoors. Arriving at the ghost town, they hit the usual spots: pharmacies, gas stations, markets. Eric siphoned gas, while others searched shops. They were loading up their trucks when Jasmine's radio crackled unexpectedly. "Help, please," a voice pleaded faintly. She snatched up the radio. "This is Jasmine. Who's there?" "Trapped. In the dental clinic. Hurry." The voice faded into static. Jasmine quickly gathered some others. They raced down Main Street to a small dentist's office, weapons ready. Eric tried the door unlocked. As he fumbled with his lockpick set, they heard shuffling inside, someone whimpering. Finally getting the door open, they swept in ready to fire. But no infected were inside. Huddled in the corner by the receptionist's counter was a young woman, face bruised and arm bleeding. She shrieked as they burst in. "No, get away." Holstering her gun, Jasmine approached slowly. "It's okay, we're here to help." She spoke calmly until the tense woman stopped trembling. Her name was Nina, and she'd been taking shelter in the clinic for weeks, surviving off whatever scraps of food were lying around. Jasmine had a million questions, but they could come later. For now, she just helped Nina to her feet. "Let's get you up a mountain where it's safe." Chapter 12. Nina turned out to be pregnant, her malnourishment compromising the pregnancy. Claire and Hannah nursed her back to health once Jasmine's group brought her to North Face. In a few weeks, her belly swelled with new life. Children would be born even in this ravaged world, Jasmine realized. There was hope. Spring was a time of renewal for the community. Hunting and foraging crews brought back bounties of fresh meat and greens after the long winter. Under the flowered meadows and leafy forests, scouts discovered wild berry patches and edible mushrooms. Spirits soared as people shed their bulky winter clothing to work outside under sunny blue skies. Jasmine found herself making excuses just to be around Roman, volunteering for the woodcutting and construction crews he oversaw. Something about his quiet strength and generosity of spirit drew her in. And the way the laughter lines around his eyes crinkled when he grinned made her stomach flutter occasionally. Was she developing a crush? Jasmine pushed the thoughts away. No time for distractions. There were always more preparations to be made before next winter. New huts and cabins were built to house their growing numbers. Roman sent her out with Neil to scout good hunting grounds and trapping locations to stockpile food. Jasmine embraced the responsibility, knowing Roman was grooming her as a leader. Each day brought a new challenge, but she was thriving. On a crisp afternoon, she took Ava out to teach her some basic tracking and hunting skills. They were laying trail markers when Jasmine noticed the birds had all fallen silent. She tensed, sensing something amiss. Scanning the trees, she spotted two distant figures moving stealthily upwind. Not infected, these moved with purpose. But who? "Get down," she whispered to Ava, pulling the girl behind a lawn. Peering over it, Jasmine counted 5 more camouflaged figures fanning out, armed with rifles. Her heart raced. They were surrounded. Chapter 13. "Don't move," a gravelly voice ordered from behind them. Jasmine slowly turned to see a bearded man in worn body armor emerging from the trees, rifle trained on her. His cold blue eyes were unsettling. These were clearly not friendly survivors. "What do you want from us?" Jasmine asked evenly, shielding Ava. The man smiled coldly. "Getting right to it. I appreciate that. You're going to take us to your camp. Don't try resisting." He gestured, and 2 men hauled them to their feet. Jasmine, mind raced. She had to somehow get back and warn the community, but not with Ava at risk. As they were shoved through the woods, she whispered for Ava to run at the first chance. The girl nodded bravely. Jasmine just prayed for an opening. They reached a shallow creek. When their captor turned to cross, Jasmine shoved Ava forward. "Now go," she yelled. As Ava splashed upstream, Jasmine launched herself at the nearest thug. She smashed her elbow into his nose and wrenched the rifle away. Gunshots rang out as she darted into the forest. None of the furious shouting behind her could match the pounding in her chest. Had Ava made it free? Jasmine didn't stop running until she reached Northface's perimeter. People looked up in surprise as she staggered and bleeding, clothes torn. Catching her breath, she quickly warned Roman about the armed men, squatters or marauders. They had to prepare for a possible attack. After demanding to know every detail, Roman sprang into action. They rapidly fortified defenses. Extra guards took up armed posts, watching the trails leading up from the valley. Inside the conduits, children and non-combatants were moved into interior rooms. Rifles were loaded and distributed. As the sun sank below the ridgeline, the community waited tensely for whatever was coming. Jasmine joined Roman on the perimeter, watching the dark forest for signs of movement. She was still furious with herself for leaving Ava. But Roman's solid presence beside her kept her emotions in check. She was ready to fight to protect her community and its dream for the future. Let the marauders come, she thought coldly. They would not find easy prey. Chapter 14. 2 days passed without any sign of the marauders. Patrols reported no tracks or other activity around Northface's perimeter. The community remained on alert, but hopes rose that the threat had passed. Jasmine prayed young Ava had escaped and not ended up in the clutches of those men. Each night she took a shift scanning the shadowy tree line for any flash or muzzle flare indicating an attack. But all stayed quiet and dark. To occupy the community's anxious energy, Roman ordered work to resume on long-term projects, tanning hides for future clothing, smoking meat for winter stores, extra firewood gathering. Keeping spirits calm and routine as normal was imperative. He asked Jasmine to oversee taking inventory of their ammo and weapons supplies, in case a siege or sustained assault occurred. If battle was coming, they had to be ready. Late one afternoon, Jasmine was cleaning rifles with Hannah when shouts rang out. They rushed outside to see a lone figure stumbling out of the woods and into the center of the compound. It was Ava. Jasmine sprinted over and swept the girl into a fierce hug. She had made it. A patrol quickly scoured the area, but found no pursuers. However, Ava escaped. She was safe now. That night, the teen told her story over dinner while hungrily devouring a bowl of stew. The marauders had pursued her after Jasmine fled. Ava managed to slip into a deep, rocky crevice too narrow for the men to reach her. After they gave up and left, she hid until emerging at dusk to trek back. Jasmine beamed with pride at the girl's courage and resourcefulness. With the threat possibly resurfacing, Jasmine doubled her patrols. A few uneventful days later, she was scanning the forest's edge at night when a flare arced up from the valley, the signal for intruders. Rifles cocked around her. This was it. Hunkering down behind sandbags, Jasmine watched figures emerge from the trees in the moonlight. The fight for Northface was on. Chapter 15. Jasmine peered through her night vision scope as the marauders approached. She counted 12 hostiles fanning out, heavily armed. They likely expected an easy ambush under cover of darkness. Jasmine's lips curled in a predatory grin. They had no idea what awaited them. She sighted down her scope, crosshairs settling on the leader's chest. As he raised a hand to signal the attack, Jasmine squeezed her trigger. The crack of the rifle echoed off the peaks. The leader staggered back, dropping dead into the snow. "Open fire!" Jasmine yelled. The mountainside erupted with gunfire as her people poured lead into the shocked marauders from their concealed positions. Muzzle flashes lit up the forest like fireflies as screams rang out. Jasmine kept firing, her rifle bucking steadily against her shoulder. Despite the withering fire, the attackers regrouped and rushed towards the perimeter. Grenades exploded, shredding trees with shrapnel. Jasmine dropped her empty magazine and slapped in a fresh one. "Hold the line," she shouted through the chaos. No way would these bastards breach their defenses. When her rifle clicked empty again, she drew her pistol and kept firing alongside Roman in the trench. The marauders came bounding over the sandbags right towards them. Jasmine's pistol barked, dropping two at close range. Roman swung his shotgun in a wide arc, teeth bared ferociously. Adrenaline coursed through her veins. They would defend this place to the death. The skirmish was brief but brutal. Bodies littered the bloody snow as the attackers finally retreated back into the forest. Jasmine slumped down, panting but exhilarated. Around her, whoops rang out as people hugged and cheered their victory. They had defended their home. Northface stood strong. Kicking spent shell casings away, Jasmine extended a hand and helped haul Roman out of the trench. He gripped her shoulder, smiling wearily but with pride. "We did it. Couldn't have done this without you." Jasmine just nodded, feeling she had found her true place in this new world at last. Chapter 16. In the weeks after repelling the marauder attack, Jasmine found herself working closely with Roman to bolster Northface's security. They expanded the perimeter fence and added more guard towers. Extra patrols scouted the surrounding mountains thoroughly for any remaining threats. Jasmine wanted the community to have total awareness and control of the rugged territory now. Through long days of labor and planning together, she got to know Roman better. His laconic manner hid a sharp mind and deep wells of anger. Jasmine understood his raw fury at the greed and cruelty unleashed by society's collapse. It mirrored her own rage at the injustice. But Roman's vision for Northface tempered that anger into hope, showing humanity's beauty was still worth fighting for in even the darkest times. One sunny afternoon on patrol, Jasmine decided to open up to him about her past. About the chronic depression and alcoholism that cost her a coveted detective role back on the police force, her struggles rebuilding a career in a small mountain town until the outbreak hit. Roman just listened silently until she finished. "The past is done," he said. "Sometimes it takes the end of the world to find where you truly belong." He gave her shoulder a reassuring squeeze. Jasmine met his eyes, surprised at the care and wisdom in those rugged features. She couldn't deny her attraction anymore. Being near Roman felt more like home than anywhere had before the apocalypse turned life upside down. For now, she just cherished their deepening bond. As spring blossomed, Roman sent her 2 lead scouts searching the valleys for other survivor enclaves or refugee camps. One day, exploring a box canyon, she heard voices echoing up the rocky walls. She followed the sound to a cave sheltering over a dozen men, women, and children. They cringed at the sight of her rifle until she lowered it with a smile. "My name is Jasmine," she said. "There are more of us up in the mountains. You aren't alone." The looks of joy and relief through their tears affected her profoundly. Saving lives mattered as much as taking them, she reflected. There was still good left to fight for. Chapter 17. The cave survivors crowded happily into Northface's vehicles for the ride up the mountain. Medics checked them over in the clinic, while the community welcomed them all with a hot meal. Jasmine watched, gratified, as children led the newcomers around the bustling compound. some hope and stability had returned to these broken lives. She rejoined Roman, inspecting the weapons stash in the armory. "Nice haul today," he said, gesturing to the crates of firearms and gear they had recovered from the cave group. "Should keep us flush for a while." Jasmine nodded. "Once they're nursed back to health, those new folks will make good recruits too. We're getting stronger." "All thanks to you." Roman put a hand on her shoulder. "I've got people scouting 30 miles out now, looking for survivors. We'll find them, just like you did." Jasmine flushed at the praise. There was such warmth and affection in Roman's voice. Being near him made her heart race, like she was a teenager again. She lifted her eyes to meet his penetrating gaze. He was still touching her shoulder lightly. Without thinking, she leaned in closer, drawn like a moth to his fiery spirit. Just then, footsteps echoed down the hall. They jumped back awkwardly as Neil appeared in the doorway. "Roman, we're getting some weird radio chatter you should hear." The spell broken, Roman brushed past Jasmine hastily. "I better check on that," he mumbled without meeting her eyes. She leaned on a supply crate and sighed in frustration as his footsteps faded down the hall. The timing was always off. Pushing down her disappointment, she finished taking inventory and headed out on evening patrol. But glimpsing Roman across the compound, laughter lines crinkling as he joked with some kids, her heart surged with affection once more. Their time would come. Over the next weeks, more refugees filtered up the mountain. Roman initiated classes to train newcomers in combat and survival skills. "We'll need every able hand ready," he told Jasmine grimly one day. Cryptic radio transmissions mentioned a dangerous group moving in these mountains. Jasmine wondered if the marauders they had fought were scouts for something far worse. Dark omens hung over the warm breezes of late spring. Chapter 18. The first attack came without warning. A massive blast jolted Jasmine awake one night, debris raining down on her roof. Grabbing her rifle, she rushed outside to see flames engulfing the neighboring armory. People scrambled to form bucket lines. Jasmine scanned the dark woods with her flashlight, looking for attackers. Another explosion erupted from the opposite side of the compound, near their main fuel supply. So the enemy was using the darkness and distraction to split their defenses. Clever, but Jasmine immediately guessed their goal. "Secure the clinic and living quarters," she yelled. Protecting the vulnerable was paramount. Shouldering her rifle, she sprinted through whizzing bullets and smoke. A burst of automatic fire raked the ground by her boots. She dove behind a truck for cover, then leaned out to blast the muzzle flash she had seen, dropping an enemy fighter. Who were these mercs? Yelling for her people to get down, she provided covering fire while families and elderly made it inside the clinic safely. The explosions had stopped, but gunshots still cracked sporadically. Their defenses were holding for now. As dawn broke, grim, downtrodden faces emerged to survey the damage. The armory and fuel depot had been destroyed. But miraculously, no one in the community was badly hurt. Jasmine gripped her rifle tightly. This was just the first blow, with more to come. She would help Roman find whoever was orchestrating these sinister attacks. Justice would be served. In the days that followed, Jasmine assisted with cleanup and repairs. Roman ordered the whole community on high alert now. Kids were no longer allowed to go off unsupervised. Guards patrolled nonstop, scouring the rugged terrain for signs of the shadowy enemy. While on watch late one night, Jasmine saw lights flickering through the trees. Peering through binoculars, she made out camouflage tents and equipment, some type of base camp. The mercs were right on their doorstep, emboldened. At dawn, she led Roman to the spot. As they observed from cover, a chill went down Jasmine's spine. The orchestrator of the attacks was now clear. A tall, clean-shaven man in tactical gear emerged from a tent barking orders. Jasmine would never forget that face, even with its ugly, jagged scar, the marauder leader who had captured her and Ava weeks ago. She had hoped him dead after the failed assault, but hate and vengeance drove men like him. Gripping her rifle, she swore to end this threat to her community for good, no matter the cost. Chapter 19. We hit them now, before they fully dig in, Jasmine urged Roman as they hiked swiftly back up the mountain. But he shook his head grimly. "Recon only for now, we're outgunned." Frustration welled up in her. Each day that mercenary camp grew stronger put North Face at greater risk. However, she trusted Roman's tactical judgment. If he counseled patience and preparation for the fight ahead, she would follow his lead. Over the next week, they kept sharp watch on the enemy's movements, analyzing their routines and defenses. Roman had Neil quietly train snipers. The mercs were scouted by pairs in ghillie suits so they could map the camp's layout when the attack came. Stealth and rapid coordinated strikes would be essential, Roman explained. But even the best-laid plans could crumble in battle. A week later, Jasmine was hunkered down with her snipers overlooking the mercenary camp when chaos erupted. Grenade explosions and gunfire suddenly rang out from the far side, sending the mercs scrambling to rally a defense. Who was hitting them now? Peering through her scope, Jasmine glimpsed camouflaged figures burst from the trees, rifles blazing on full auto. They're people. She grimly recognized the black bandanas on some. "It's the Grim Reapers," she muttered. The infamous local marauder band must have caught wind of an outside group on their turf. Well, the enemy of their enemy. Jasmine sighted down on a mercenary machine gunner and dropped him cold before he could mow down the charging reapers. One headache at a time, she thought, firing steadily. The snipers followed her lead, picking off mercs from the ridge. The skirmish was chaotic, but the ambush effective. The remaining mercs retreated, leaving smoldering wreckage and bodies behind. Jasmine kept expecting the reapers to turn their sights up towards North Face next. But to her surprise, they just faded back into the mountains once the interlopers were routed. She had even more questions about the elusive group. For now, at least the immediate threat was eliminated. They were safe, but for how long? Chapter 20. In the weeks following the mercenary attack, Jasmine stepped up training recruits in hand-to-hand combat and weapons drills. Many of the newcomers they had rescued knew only basic self-defense. She was determined to make fighters out of all who were willing. They needed the numbers. The Grim Reapers concerned her most. Very little was known about the masked marauders who stalked these mountains. Even after observing them fight the mercenaries, their goals and motivations remained a mystery. Were they protecting their own territory, or did they have darker ambitions? Either way, Jasmine knew more bloody conflicts lay ahead. Peace was fleeting in the world the plague had made. On bright mornings, with mist still clinging to the evergreens, it was possible to forget the dangers for a time. The work of sustaining the community went on. Under Roman's guidance, they were making North Face as self-sufficient as possible through hunting, agriculture, collecting rainwater. Becoming part of the natural cycles mattered to Roman. Watching him teach children how to care for the vegetable garden, patient and kind, Jasmine was reminded what they were fighting for, in not just survival, but life beyond mere subsistence. A world where compassion and conscience endure, keeping humanity's light flickering. Roman gave people hope. He was hope for her. Late one night on perimeter guard duty, Jasmine spotted a hulking shadow ease out of the woods. Gripping her rifle tight, she watched an enormous grizzly bear snuffle around the compost pile before shuffling off into the thicket. Even the wilderness's kings wandered this strange new world, trying to endure. Slinging her rifle back over her shoulder, Jasmine sighed and gazed up at the brilliant spray of stars overhead. All living beings just wanted a small space to feel safe. She would defend that for her people, no matter what came. Chapter 21. The first heavy snow came early that fall, blanketing the mountain and forest in glistening white. Jasmine watched fat flakes swirling outside the window, remembering last winter's brutal cold. They were better supplied now, but the long isolation taxed everyone mentally. She tried to keep spirits up, but an undercurrent of fear and uncertainty lurked close beneath the surface. Hushed conversations speculated about who would snap first when the true winter snows buried them in. The trauma and anxiety was getting to people, fraying trust. Jasmine noticed sideways looks cast her way sometimes when she entered a room. Paranoia was seeping through the walls along with the icy drafts. Events spiraled out of control with frightening speed after Astrid, one of the older teens, collapsed, hacking up blood. Claire quickly quarantined her in the clinic, but it was too late. By morning, over a dozen others had showed symptoms of the violent respiratory illness. Medicine supplies couldn't combat it. Within 48 hours, 5 people were dead, including little Elijah, barely 6 years old. Grief swirled with superstition and fear until it curdled into hate and accusations. Nora claimed her charm bracelet had gone missing just before Astrid got sick. She suspected Hannah, who had criticized her hoarding talismans and herbs instead of relying on modern medicine. The simmering tension sparked into outright threats. Before it could turn violent, Jasmine and Roman separated everyone. They imposed a lockdown, with armed patrols securing each building. But Jasmine wondered grimly how long the greater danger was outside versus within these barricaded walls. Their community was cracking under the strain. Could it hold until spring? Through that long, brutal winter, the mood remained volatile. More died from the strange illness, despite Claire's tireless efforts. Everyone not on guard duty was put to work mending clothes, insulated outerwear, crafting candles, and stockpiling firewood, anything to keep occupied. Blowing snow and wind howled endlessly outside. Jasmine's patrols became the sole respite from stifling tension inside. She welcomed the solitude and quiet, being able to breathe freely. Eyes stinging from smoke and stress would water as she gazed at the beautiful, uncaring mountains. However little time humanity had left, nature endured forever. Its patient strength flowed into her veins out there. She would need every ounce of it for what was to come. Chapter 22. The blizzard came with frightening speed, slamming into the mountain with 70-mile-per-hour winds. Jasmine stared out the frosted window at an impenetrable wall of swirling snow. They couldn't maintain patrols or communications in white-out conditions like this. She tried to raise Roman on the radio, but got only static. They were on their own. Bundled in jackets and blankets, everyone gathered in the communal kitchen and living area, the largest space with a fireplace in their main lodge. Sleeping side by side on mattresses and cushions spread across the floor gave some comfort, but anxiety hung over them. What if the snow kept accumulating, collapsing the roof? On the third night, the lights suddenly went out. The children wailed in terror until Jasmine got emergency lanterns lit. She did her best to radiate calm confidence, telling stories and leading quiet songs. But even she gasped when a thunderous boom shook the walls. Everyone gazed up at the ceiling fearfully. The snow had to be over 20 feet by now. Miraculously, the lodge held. The next morning, faint gray light piercing the windows brought a glimmer of hope. When they pushed open the front door, it met a wall of icy white. The blizzard had completely entombed them. Etienne burst into frightened tears. Jasmine stroked his hair, mustering her most reassuring voice. "It's okay. The storm can't get us in here. We'll just have to wait it out together." The strange setback brought a surprising sense of community again. Sharing all food and supplies equally mattered more now that they were enduring this trial together. Jasmine let go of her simmering anger and suspicions from before the blizzard hit. They would either survive united as one people or perish divided. She saw flares of Roman's wisdom and empathy rekindle in others too when spirits flagged. His legacy endured. Rations stretched thin by the 10th snowbound day. That night, Jasmine slipped outside into the muffled silence. The utter stillness and solitude beneath billions of glittering stars calmed her racing mind. They would share whatever fate these mountains ordained. She glanced back at the warm glow in the lodge's windows, at the faint echoes of laughter within. Each moment of love and joy defied the darkness. Nor face endured. So did hope. Chapter 23. Jasmine was awoken by the sound of shovels scraping on snow. Peering outside, she saw Roman leading crews to dig out the lodge's buried doors and windows. She grinned in relief. If he was here, that meant the worst of the blizzard had passed. They just might make it after all. Once paths were cleared, Roman immediately took charge again, organizing teams to take inventory and clear collapsed roofs. His solid, reassuring presence lifted everyone's spirits. Watching him make the rounds speaking with each person, Jasmine was inspired by his compassion and leadership. With him guiding them, they would rebuild stronger than ever. The work of digging out continued for several grueling days. Patrols with ski gear and snowshoes set out to check for structural damage across the compound. Jasmine led a team assessing the buried greenhouses and garden beds. The glass panes had shattered under the sheer weight of 20-foot drifts, destroying that crucial food source. Their crops were lost. She delivered the bad news to Roman. He took it solemnly, already knowing this winter would bring more rationing, hunger, and potential sickness. "We'll survive, like we always do," he said, grasping her shoulder. "Together." Jasmine wished she could fully share his faith. The demands of leadership never allowed Roman to show if his own hope wavered. But she would be his rock, taking on whatever darkness needed facing so he could keep being the community's light. She vowed to stand at his side, no matter how difficult the road ahead became. The true depth of the challenges facing them after this calamity became clearer by the day. Half their food stores had spoiled due to a broken roof. Fuel was badly depleted, running heaters and generators non-stop during the weeks of entombment. The vehicle fleet had been buried and would need extensive repairs to make drivable again. Winter's cruel blow had left North Face severely crippled. But Jasmine was heartened to see everyone pitch in without complaint. Roman's example stirred them to toil bravely. In the quiet moments, she watched him stare up at the mountains thoughtfully. He was already planning how to guide them through the long, desperate months still to come. Their survival was his sole purpose. She would help carry that weight for him in any way she could. Chapter 24. Trips down the mountain were delayed by near-constant snowfall in the early weeks of winter. Jasmine led scouts clearing paths with snowplows just to reach the nearest town. Icy gales battered them mercilessly out on the exposed slopes. She was relieved when the last convoy rumbled back into North Face, heavy laden with supplies. They had scraped together enough food and fuel to last, though rationing remained strictly enforced. In the short, gloomy days, she noticed Roman becoming withdrawn and haggard from the immense pressure. Jasmine forced him to take breaks, bringing him coffee laced with the few precious drops of whiskey left. She coaxed brief smiles from him, recounting funny mishaps that happened on her cruise. Anything to lighten his burden momentarily. Sometimes they would sit listening to crackling music on the radio, songs from another lifetime. She lived for those quiet moments together. The weary hope in Roman's eyes as he relaxed stirred feelings she had to keep carefully tucked away while their survival hung so tenuously. On mute gray mornings, Jasmine led shotgun on the armored snowplows breaking paths through the icy ravines towards town. They filled trucks with all the scavenged food and supplies that could fit before rumbling back up the precarious mountain roads. She took pride in keeping her crew's discipline and alert out in the hostile environment. Morale and loyalty mattered as much as the scarce gallon jugs of heating oil they liberated. As December darkened into January, she noticed figures tracking them from a distance during missions. The Grim Reapers were growing bolder, stalking North Face's critical supply runs now. Jasmine didn't engage, but made sure their group was armed to the teeth in case the bandits tried raiding a caravan. Let them just try it, she thought bitterly. They must be truly desperate to consider braving North Face's wrath. Raven, the young lookout who had spotted the Reapers, rode back with Jasmine after one run. Why follow us but never attack? He wondered aloud. Jasmine just stared ahead silently. There were many forces in these mountains living on the edge this cruel winter. Hunger and necessity drove people and creatures to things they never would otherwise. Dark times bred dark deeds. Not even North Face was fully immune. Chapter 25. Jasmine was helping Claire take inventory in the clinic when Roman burst in, covered in snow and breathing hard. Perimeter alarm tripped near the south end, he panted. Had to be the Reapers' grab weapons. Jasmine jammed a pistol into her waistband and grabbed her assault rifle. Storming into the blizzard with Roman, she heard distant cracks of gunfire beyond the whipping snow. How brazen for the bandits to attack North Face directly. Get to the armory, she told Roman. I'll reinforce the lines. Moving through hastily dug fighting positions, Jasmine directed panicked recruits. The attack seemed concentrated on the solar array field. She had Eric radio the roof sniper nests to cover their flanks. The Reapers must have figured North Face would be vulnerable with power and heat so dependent on protecting the fragile solar panels. Clever but foolish. She would teach them that grave mistake. Bursting out of the tree line, Jasmine opened up on full auto, dropping two black-clad figures trying to climb the perimeter fence. The wild shooting revealed more positions. She darted from cover to cover, blasting Reapers foolish enough to show themselves. Adrenaline surged through her veins. Gunpowder stained the icy air. No more hiding and stalking. Today they finished this threat for good. A roar made her whip around, just as a huge reaper charged from the swirling blizzard, swinging a hatchet at her head. Jasmine pivoted, and slammed her knee viciously into his crotch. As he staggered back in agony, she raised her rifle and pumped a final bullet into his skull. Panting, she looked around. Muzzle flashes still flickered ahead. "Push forward," she yelled, rallying her fighters. They pressed through the trees until the shooting petered out. Bodies lay scattered in the snow. The rest had pulled back. This time, the formidable defenses of North Face had held. As she helped the wounded back into the compound, Jasmine shook her head grimly. The opportunistic attacks and brazen risk-taking proved the Reapers were as desperate as any other group trying to endure this punishing winter. She took no joy in the deaths, but they forced the confrontation. North Face would do whatever it took to survive, too. Chapter 26. "We can't stay isolated and just react to threats," Jasmine urged Roman. "We need to hunt the Reapers down now." She had come straight from the infirmary, still drenched in blood and sweat, to argue they needed to take the fight back to the masked marauders. Roman stood at his planning table, silently weighing her words. He finally shook his head. "Revenge won't help us or them," he said wearily. "We've got enough mouths to feed and wood to haul without getting bogged down chasing ghosts through the mountains." Jasmine bit her tongue in frustration. She understood his logic, but the danger would only return later. Still, she trusted Roman's leadership. The community came first. Over the next week, she assisted Neil taking inventory of ammo and weaponry. Their losses in the skirmish hadn't been too severe, but she worried about their dwindling long-term supply. Gunpowder and lead were as precious for survival now as food or medicine, and deadly force from desperate groups seemed inevitable each new season. Everyone fell wearily into the familiar routines of survival as winter's grasp persisted into April. Rotas for chores like cooking, laundry, and tending the generators meant no rest. Jasmine monitored the remaining fuel reserves anxiously. They still had months before warming weather allowed growing crops again. Would their supplies last? On long hunts, she noticed game was scarcer too, the starving elk and deer driven down into the valleys. The mountains yielded their bounty stingily now, even to those born here. Nothing came easily anymore. But North Face endured. They just needed to hold on a little longer till conditions improved. The first cracks of spring thunder heralded a turn. Melting avalanches spilled off the peaks, filling ravines with the music of running water. Patches of green slowly reappeared through blanketed valleys. Jasmine breathed deeply of the cool mountain air, scented with bud and bloom. Vitality was returning to the land. Their world was coming back to life. Standing on the perimeter fence they had fought so hard to defend, she let herself feel hope again. The future remained uncertain, but nature's cycles of death and rebirth showed that each dawn still offered life. That was cause enough to keep struggling. Chapter 27. Spring's arrival galvanized everyone in North Face to action again. Under Roman's direction, crews hurried to plow fields for planting, while others went hunting to stockpile meat, before the game retreated high into the mountains again. Jasmine welcomed the hurried intensity. Idleness bred restlessness and doubt among her fighters. Keeping them busy with purpose was vital. In muddy planting fields, she saw hope and pride rekindling in weary faces as people dropped seeds into the earth with care. Each potato cutting, carrot top, and bean sprout was a small investment towards survival. showing that life could be coaxed from the still frozen ground through sheer will. Such stubborn faith powered North Face as much as any generator did. Jasmine traded her rifle for pruning shears temporarily, helping tend the cherry saplings in the orchard. The mindless repetition let her thoughts wander. She realized how much this community had come to feel like home over the chaotic seasons. The bonds nurtured with people like Claire, Connor, Bridget, and Ava mattered more to her than she ever expected in such bleak times. She would see them safe through whatever tribulations still loomed. Thunderhead's building in the afternoon spelled trouble. Jasmine was finishing perimeter patrol when an ear-splitting crack made her dive for cover, just before a massive pine exploded into flames. The air filled with ozone as a lightning storm rolled over North Face, setting trees ablaze and forcing everyone to hunker down. She took shelter from the deluge in the animal pens with the horses and goats, waiting tensely to see if their compound would withstand nature's onslaught. They were blessedly spared, the fires quenched by muddy rain. Jasmine stared in wonder at waterfalls cascading off the mountains, alight with rainbows as the clouds parted again. The high country was indifferent to the struggles of those sheltering in its shadow. But breathtaking moments like this revived her faith that life's beauty persisted if people had eyes to see it. She would keep helping the community find meaning not just in survival, but small joys that proved the spirit could not be extinguished either. Chapter 28. Rumors spread of refugee camps in the towns downriver as river trade opened up, bringing tantalizing word of civilization again. Some in North Face lobbied Roman to reach out and ally their community with larger encampments that offered safety in numbers. But Jasmine agreed with Roman's caution about abandoning their hard-won foothold. Outsiders might still bring sickness, strife, and dependence again. To placate the discontented, Roman sent diplomats south. They returned weeks later with hopeful reports, mentioning groups called havens forming in the lowlands, networks of allied camps and settlements. It all sounded idealistic to Jasmine. Such security required resources and manpower that the remote mountain enclaves likely lacked. Everyone was still just scraping by. Focusing on her own community was enough challenge day to day. She managed rotating details, fortifying defenses, stockpiling meat for the coming winter, caching weapons in strategic spots. Anything to prepare North Face for the isolation ahead when high passes closed again. They had survived worse seasons before. Let the lowland politics play out while her people focused on enduring. Most evenings, she joined Roman for companionable meals, their hard-won intimacy feeling more natural as the days warmed. Afterwards, they would share a drink on the porch, reminiscing late into the night about innocuous memories of a world long gone, favorite concerts, college escapades, backyard cookouts. Anything but the shared trauma endured since. It felt good to laugh together again. However, good moments were often fleeting. A frantic call came over the radio that a crew was under attack while checking trap lines. Jasmine sprinted to grab weapons and men. When they arrived, it was too late. Ravaged bodies lay strewn about, ruins still smoldering. Signs showed it was the Reaper's grisly work. Jasmine clenched her jaw. The cycle of violence churned on as she feared. Peace was a fragile illusion. Standing there in the quiet twilight, the staggering cruelty and futility of it all threatened to overwhelm her. But she could not surrender to despair. Grief would have to wait. For now, they had to carry the burden of the dead down the mountain while preparing the living for the inevitable battles still to come. It was their fate until the world stopped being what it was. She set her feet on the grim path once more, Chapter 29. Summer's languid days brought a semblance of peace, though Jasmine knew how precarious it was. She increased patrols out farther from North Face's core valley. Any hint of the Grim Reapers or other groups encroaching needed to be identified early. The security bought by isolation was crucial to preserving the community's way of life. She took that duty gravely. When not scheduling sentry rotations or leading rifle marksmanship lessons, Jasmine snuck in time helping Roman repair weather damage around the compound. They worked seamlessly in easy silence, sharing the occasional smile or laugh. She treasured those simple moments together. The rest of the world with its violence and madness felt very far away then. But reality always returned. Late one night on watch, she spotted flickering lights high up in the jagged peaks far above North Face's valley. Observation through binoculars showed it was some kind of large camp, with structures made of metal glinting in the sun. Jasmine marked the spot on their map carefully. They would have to monitor this strange new neighbor closely. At dawn, she led Roman up the steep ravine towards the site. As the imposing metal walls and pipe-like structures emerged from behind the ridgeline, her stomach sank. "A methane rig," Roman muttered grimly. Jasmine realized what it meant. The outside world was looking to the mountains again for resources. Her gut told her this encroaching industry spelling nothing good, only greed and pollution. She turned to Roman. "We should sabotage it now before they can scale up, otherwise our valley is doomed." He pondered a long moment before shaking his head reluctantly. "Can't risk open conflict yet, but we watch them and be ready." His tone made clear he disliked leaving the threat unchecked as much as she did. But challenging enemies incautiously could condemn North Face. Patience was needed, however it chafed. Descending back into the idyllic summering valley, Jasmine glanced over her shoulder to where the rig nestled like a parasite. Their isolated sanctuary suddenly seemed far more fragile. She would do anything to protect this community and its spirit, so precious in the broken world. No sacrifice was too much. Chapter 30. By midsummer, the methane rig had metastasized into a sprawling complex of pipelines and processing stations creeping down from the windswept peaks. The corporation behind it was rapidly exploiting the remote location and lack of oversight. Jasmine watched their poison spread across the land with increasing dismay. When an elderly couple from North Face was found dying from chemically contaminated water, something in her snapped. She knew Roman opposed rash action, but this smug outside enemy didn't play by rules of coexistence and restraint. Jasmine gathered a small strike team without informing Roman, all grimly determined. Hiking through the brush to the pipeline access road, they planted explosives on the key junction points. She glanced back at the now massive rig looming on the ridgeline as she lit the detonator cord. This was for those who couldn't defend themselves. The blasts echoed like thunder through the valleys. She stared, awestruck, as flames engulfed the pipeline in roaring curtains. Before security teams could even react, her group was melting back into the forests and ravines. It was only the first blow, but long overdue. She had no doubt harsh retaliation would follow, but the lines were drawn. All that mattered now was protecting North Face. Over the following weeks, Jasmine bolstered their defenses and readiness for potential escalation. Patrols reported drones scanning the mountains from above and increased activity around the damaged rig. She ramped up weapons training and had Neil quietly reinforce their minefields and traps. If war was coming, they had to be dug in and ready. The day of reckoning came quicker than she anticipated. An armored convoy, emblazoned with the raid company's logo, rumbled up the winding trail from town towards North Faces Valley. She calmly ordered the evacuation of non-combatants into the rear bunkers before rallying her fighters. As drone missiles exploded around the perimeter, Jasmine's only thought was making the enemy pay dearly. This was her land, her home, and she would never surrender it. Chapter 31. Smoke blotted the setting sun as Jasmine moved through choking haze and ringing ears to assess their defenses. The initial enemy bombardment had been heavy but inaccurate. Her people were still intact, sheltered behind layers of sandbags and concrete. As flares arced up, illuminating advancing troops, she allowed herself a flicker of fierce joy. The fight would be close and ugly. Jasmine slithered into the trench line near the front gate. The teenage recruits around her were wide-eyed, rifles trembling. She grasped shoulders firmly, meeting their frightened eyes. "Steady, we are defending our home and lives. This moment is why we trained you hard. Now is the time to be brave for your people, your families. Show no mercy, because you will receive none." The youths nodded, holding their chins high. Jasmine peered over the parapet as armored figures emerged from the smoke, opening fire. She waited until they were close before yelling now. Her people rose in unison, unleashing blistering gunfire and grenades. Bodies ripped apart before her eyes. The attack wavered, then regained momentum. Jasmine fired relentlessly beside the others. Their world had narrowed to this killing field, where mercy and hesitation meant death. When her rifle clicked empty, she drew the kukri and leapt into the breached perimeter wire, screaming. All that mattered now was ferocity and blood. Reason had no place left in such ravenous madness. By dawn, the ground was carpeted with mangled corpses. Collapsed in her trench, Jasmine stared numbly at the darkening clouds gathering over the peaks. Were such Pyrrhic victories worth the cost? Each battle pushed them all closer towards losing that vital part of being human that made life worth fighting for. But surrender meant oblivion. So the butchery must continue. She wiped the gore from her blade as light rain began to fall, wondering how many more death-soaked dawns this conflict had left. Roman had been right about avoiding open war. Now they were committed against an enemy that could attrite their community into nothingness. The methane rig loomed above like an indifferent god waiting to reclaim the land. She could only hope vengeance had not doomed them all. Chapter 32. Weeks passed in a grueling stalemate. Patrols clashed daily with mercenary strike teams in the ravines. Night shelling barrages kept everyone on edge. Both sides slowly bled, attrited by the harsh terrain as much as bullets. Rest was a luxury, supplies dwindling faster each day as the siege dragged on. Jasmine helped bury the dead after one failed assault on their northern redoubt. Mostly fresh-faced recruits who only weeks earlier had still shown the bright innocence of youth. Now fodder for worms because of her decisions. The sightless eyes weighing her down felt like the mountains themselves sitting upon her chest. Was this sacrifice worth preserving North Face's values? Each cruel choice carried her further from what she had once stood for before vendetta and paranoia consumed her. She had convinced herself the community depended on her hardened leadership to survive. But now, staring at the mounting cost, deeper doubts gnawed at her convictions. One twilight, she joined the weary funeral procession to the hillside cemetery where generations of North Faces kin lay beneath generations of pines. As low lamentations echoed off the ridgelines, Roman moved to stand beside her. No words needed spoken. She saw the same haunted questions etched in his face that kept her awake nights, wondering if their souls' prices for this land might prove too high. But the die was cast. They must see the desperate fight through to its bitter end, if only to honor the fallen. As the curtain of night fell, Jasmine lingered a final moment watching candles flicker by each new bare grave. So much light still to be extinguished for nothing. It hardly seemed fair that the stars above shone as eternal and indifferent over this charnel house as they did the sanctuary Northface once was. But the universe moved uncaring, even if all below was lost. Only the living moment mattered now. Chapter 33. Autumn gales lashed the mountain valley, mercilessly seeking out weaknesses in their battered defenses. Jasmine wrapped herself tighter in her parka, squinting against the stinging sleet needling her face. The coming winter might defeat them, even if their enemies did not. Maintaining the will to fight took all her energy now. She trudged down to the main lodge, nearly deserted as everyone huddled indoors bracing against the bitter chill. All sense of routine and community had faded as survival mode sunk in. They were back to the primal basics of simply enduring another punishing high country winter. Stripping off her frozen outerwear, Jasmine slumped by the fire's meager warmth as she did quick repairs on gear. The familiar chore steadied her thoughts from their endless spiral of worry. They were down to rationing food and running the generators only a few hours a day to conserve diesel. But she had to keep believing they would make it through somehow. Giving up was not an option. Late that night on watch, she thought she saw ghostly movement in the trees near the Gulch Road. Peering through the scope revealed a staggering figure emerge into the open, then collapse. Jasmine darted down, rifle ready. She cautiously rolled the half-conscious man over with her boot, then gasped. Despite the frostbite scars and gauntness, she recognized one of the envoys Roman had sent to the southern haven last summer. With Connor's help, they carried the delirious refugee inside. As he slowly recovered enough to speak over the following days, Jasmine learned what catastrophe had befallen the lowlands. The haven, once a bastion of hope, was ash, its people scattered or slaughtered. Bands of crazed raiders now roam unchecked. Lawlessness and cruelty had consumed whatever order the camps once grasped at. Her heart sank realizing winter had likely trapped some of those refugees in the high passes, fleeing the bloodshed below. More lost souls would be coming. The world's darkness lapped ever closer to Northface now. Would they need to let the light go out here as well, just to survive the coming storm? Deep down, she feared the answer. Chapter 34. On the first full day of winter, Jasmine forced herself to walk the perimeter fences alone, facing clearly the threat they now faced. Snowdrifts nearly devoured the outer revetments and wire obstacles. Trudging through knee-deep accumulations wore her down fast. She struggled to keep putting one foot ahead of the other into the relentless flurries. Each step took all her will. This was the brutal math their predicament boiled down to now. Dwindling resources versus mouths to feed as more refugees arrived. Missing even one supply run or hunt due to storms could mean sickness and starvation for all by spring. Hoping for mercy from either their enemies or the mountain itself was foolish. Deliverance must come from within if they were to endure. Jasmine stood shivering in the swirling veil of snow, agonizing over the decisions ahead. They couldn't support non-combatants through winter. As leader of Northface's defense, the responsibility fell to her. Could she order what must be done, A final betrayal of their ideals? Were some lives now worth less than others? She spotted a hunched figure, searching desperately for firewood beyond the wire, and nearly wept. Jasmine called out to tug him back to safety before pausing. Fate had made her choice clear. She raised her rifle and fired once. The distant figure collapsed silently into the rising snow. Shivering violently from more than just the cold, she turned and headed back inside North Face's barricaded perimeter. Whatever came next, the lines were crossed. Now there could be no turning back. Over the coming weeks, an eerie calm settled over North Face. Patrols continued as always, but a growing detachment clouded Jasmine's thoughts. She waited numbly for the release that battle's fury and simplicity brought compared to the gnawing vies of silent command decisions. Each night the list of missing faces at mess grew longer, until the benches were emptied of all but her most hardened veterans. Until finally came the inevitable scratching at their walls in darkness. Jasmine's heart raced with relief. Let them come, whoever they were. Let violence replace choice. At least the slaughter and chaos to follow would silence the mocking voices in her head. Nothing mattered anymore but oblivion. Chapter 35. Jasmine was atop the gatehouse parapet with a searchlight when the first starving, half-frozen refugees came staggering out of the blizzard's fury towards North Face's perimeter. She had expected a final assault, but the figures limping through the searchlight's beam clutched only rags and crude weapons. No armor or ordnance. Her fingers hesitated over the machine gun's trigger as pitiful wailing echoed over the wind. Could she massacre helpless innocents seeking shelter? Jasmine blinked against stinging tears as her light found a mother clutching a crying infant to her skeletal chest. What desperate horrors had driven them through these mountains in winter's darkest depths? But North Face's stores were already stretched past capacity. Harsh as it felt, she knew letting them in might doom everyone. This was war, as Roman had warned. All that allowed her people's survival was the willingness to do what others would not, no matter how awful. Jasmine steeled herself, finger tensing on the trigger just as Roman's hand grasped her shoulder gently. "Enough," he said wearily. "We'll manage." Together they headed out to guide the freezing refugees inside, heartsick but resolved. The most brutal tests from this world always involve retaining one's humanity when surrounded by savagery. As long as they held on to that, Jasmine realized hope endured. Over the coming days, she did her best to make the newcomers feel welcome, even as provisions dwindled dangerously. Each night she tightened her belt another notch, welcoming the gnawing in her stomach to avoid taking food from others. Even smiling encouragingly as she watched children devour precious scraps that she had rationed carefully weeks prior. They would last or not as a community. Late one evening, Jasmine limped a circuit of the perimeter, aided only by the wan light of a slivered moon glimpsed occasionally through scudding clouds. She was constantly fatigued now, rifle feeling heavier in her numb hands each night. But she stood watch still, calling out reassurances to the now silent and ghostly line of sentries. Morale remained a leader's burden, even if it was only her own left to sustain. Leaning against a parapet, she looked upwards past the drifting snow to where stars dazzled cold and indifferent to suffering as they had for millennia. Somewhere up there, she hoped, some mercy or justice still existed that might help see them through these cruelest trials of wind and want. If only they could endure a few more weeks. Spring's salvation still awaited beyond the storm's fury. But each second took a lifetime of faith. Chapter 36. Jasmine awoke to a gentle hand shaking her. She sat bolt upright, horrified to find she had fallen asleep at her post. Roman just smiled gently. "It's okay, you're exhausted. Go get warm and eat." She tried refusing, but he insisted. Inside the dark barracks, she found a bowl of rich broth waiting by the fire. Famished, she guiltily devoured every drop, realizing it must have come from their very last reserves. Roman had likely gone without just so she could have sustenance for her duties. His generosity of spirit still stunned her. Throughout that next bleak week of whipping snow, Jasmine leaned heavily on Roman's tireless strength. When despairing refugees needed reassurance, he delivered it with steadfast conviction, however dire their situation grew. When children wept from hunger pains, he spun hope-filled stories that helped them endure one more hungry night. And when Jasmine collapsed in doubt and anguish, he simply sat with her in silent understanding that kept her demons at bay. Their community's flickering light persisted because Roman nurtured the sparks gently wherever he saw them begin to fail. She walked in his shadow, trying to reflect that same humble light back to sustain them all. How he kept his moral compass pointing true through such storms of adversity was miraculous to Jasmine. She only prayed his example might guide her own soul as well when she faltered. Late one evening on watch together, Roman extended his mittened hand and pointed to the sky. Jasmine gasped. The clouds had broken briefly, revealing a dazzling blanket of stars and the hazy shimmer of the Milky Way. Majestic Orion glittered directly overhead. "Still up there waiting for us," he said softly. The universe's grandeur soothed her anxious thoughts. They endure through another night thanks to the chance to witness such fleeting beauty together. Each glimmering star offered hope. Chapter 37. The first hints of spring came slowly, marked by longer days and the sound of water trickling beneath the melting snowpack. Jasmine smiled, watching children press their ears to the frosty windows to listen to the mountain stream's burbling song. Soon, the roads would open again for vital supply runs. They were so close now to surviving the worst together. Quarrels still flared over rationing, but Jasmine mediated patiently. Keeping spirits calm was crucial as temperatures fluctuated through final freezing spells. She glanced proudly around the crowded bunk room they all shared. Each person here had endured through their community bonds alone, and it was fellowship that must sustain them these final weeks till the mountain itself revived. Jasmine spent hours discussing preparations with Roman for when thaws permitted hunting and planting again. Their duty was providing stability and security to shepherd these people through winter's last trials. Leadership was a compact of trust, she now understood, as much as any legal authority. The refugees and elders here followed Roman's counsel because his wisdom and compassion had led them through the darkest days. That faith was humbling. When blizzards still howled outside in fits, Jasmine read aloud to the young ones huddled around the fire, conjuring fantastical stories of heroic quests towards dawn. Their rapt faces, as they hung on each word, transported her from their dim shelter to a world where hope and light still reigned. She promised them and herself silently, no matter how long the night, morning always came again. Even to mountains such as these. On a rare, clear evening, she ascended to the parapets alone, boots crunching on the crusted snow. The skull-white face of the full moon illuminated the slopes and peaks in stark monochrome. But beneath that icy veneer, the land still lived. Perhaps hope was the truest act of courage, persisting stubbornly as a seed under the snow, waiting for its chance to grow. She stood watching the silent mountains until dawn etched the horizon in golden rose. Spring was coming. Chapter 38. Rivulets of melting snow swelled into creeks, turning the mountains into a symphony of cascading water, rushing to fill rivers in the valleys far below. Patches of bare earth began to peek through damp meadows. The world was stirring itself awake. Jasmine walked the perimeter with Roman, smiling as his wide grin. They paused to savor the warm breeze sighing through the valley, rich with the scent of awakening life. She lifted her face to the sunlight filtering through the trees, letting it soak into her weary soul. They had come through the storm intact. Now the real work began again. The community fell into the familiar rhythms of spring planting and preparation with fresh zeal. Rotas for plowing and planting commenced promptly. Smokehouses were lit, and hunting crews departed before first light. Even the children wanted to help, carrying bundles of kindling to stockpile or carefully ferrying seedlings from the greenhouse. Morale soared along with the temperatures. In quiet moments, Jasmine meditated on all she had learned during their harrowing trial. Community and compassion mattered more than any abstract values. Principles meant little unless backed by mercy and wisdom to guide people through darkness. She hoped to lead by Roman's stalwart example, putting aside ego to be the selfless guardian and nurturer that Northface needed and deserved. If she could embody even a fraction of his spirit, that would sustain her when doubts returned. The days grew long and languid, the summer sun erasing memories of winter's bitterness. Jasmine joined the crews clearing deadfall from trails and collecting berries, savoring the sweat of honest labor. Children's laughter rang through the forests again. Seeing their games of chase and make-believe reignited almost forgot childhood joys in her own heart too. Life went on, so they must live fully in each precious moment fate allowed. One golden afternoon, while checking fishing weirs in the creek, Jasmine spotted Roman resting in the shade, watching dragonflies dance over the water. His calm smile beckoned to her soul's quieter rhythms. No words needed spoken. She simply sat holding his hand, listening to the gentle music of water and wind, catching glimmers of some grace lingering still in this battered world. If home was truly where the heart dwelled, she had found hers at last. Epilogue. Jasmine finishes recounting their tale as she and Roman watch the sun sink behind the snow-crested mountains. She looks down at the rows of young faces sitting enraptured on the lodge floor before them. Someday, it will be their duty to lead this community through whatever trials await. But for now, childhood's innocence still lingers in their eyes, spared the burdens borne by those before. Roman smiles over at her knowingly, both appreciating the fragile peace their sacrifices have purchased. Not all hardship fades with the seasons here in the Heights. But they have held on to what matters most through even the darkest winters: compassion, courage, and hope. As long as those frail flames continue being passed down, darkness will never fully claim these lands. Jasmine nods subtly back at him, heart brimming with gratitude for the gift of this moment together. However much uncertainty still looms over tomorrow, this brief lull lets her appreciate how far they have come. Their tale continues on, sentence by sentence, season upon season, so long as there are voices left to share it. That remarkable persistence is reason enough to keep lighting candles against the gathering dusk and believing in new dawns. As the last blazing sliver sinks below the ridgelines, children chatter excitedly heading off to dinner. Jasmine stays seated, watching through the expansive window as the lingering alpenglow fades over the peaks. A few early stars glimmer in the violet veil of twilight. No matter how long the night ahead, they will keep vigil. Roman comes over, gently taking her hand. She leans into his sturdy frame, content. They stand together in easy silence as darkness softly envelops the mountains that shaped and sheltered them. But light endures up there in the heavens, waiting to share its radiance again when the time comes. However long that takes, she knows they will be ready now. A gentle squeeze draws Jasmine from her reverie. Roman tilts his head towards the warm glow spilling from the lodge's windows. Faint laughter and voices drift out into the cool evening air. She takes one last lingering look at the tranquil valley sleeping under the nebulous splash before allowing him to lead her inside. Tomorrow awaits with its own uncertainty and challenges. But they will face it together, sustained by the spirit of endurance woven through these peaks into their bones. Whatever comes, their people and their story will continue. She takes comfort in that. For now, enough light remains to guide them home. The end.